words of my mouth and meditation of my heart be ever mindful of thee, O Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. Would you please be seated? Guess who died? Charles Manson. Did you hear that? Charles Manson finally died. I think he was in prison in, Chino or Folsom. It's one of those places that I would hear on Dragnet when I was a little boy. One of these not-so-nice California prisons. In fact, Mike was telling me just before we came in that his grandson wants to bring his ashes and bury him here in the Tampa area. You know, we have columbarium spaces. Oh. And just think of the tourist traffic we'd have. Well, Charles Manson has died. And where do you think he is right now? Heaven or hell? Well, I thank you, Bonnie, then I'll sit down. I want to talk to you today about Charles Manson. Can God save Charles Manson? I mean, it's so easy for us to talk about. We want everybody to be saved. God can save everybody, anything. And we talk about the poor unfortunates who live in deepest, darkest half rooms. Never heard the word of Jesus. He'll save them. He'll save everybody. But then we sort of get a little quiet about the Charles Mansons in this one. Now, if you remember the story of Charles Manson, I think it was 1969 or 68. 1969, Charles Manson was a leader of a bunch of kooks living out in the desert in California. And Charles Manson, this is a hippie era and all this stuff, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and Charles Manson had a plan. Charles Manson believed that if you can only excite enough panic, enough unrest, all of the social upheaval following the assassination of Martin Luther King and the Watts riots and everything else that followed, America, Charles Manson believed, was ripe for revolution. And the goal was to put Charlie on top. So Charles Manson had a plan. He'd send some of his followers into Los Angeles, into the valley, and murder people and leave signs that somebody else was doing it. He married a couple, he had a couple, Rosemary and Nino Lobianco, I think it was, murdered, but they bungled it. They were dead. How do you bungle that? He wanted to leave a sign so that people would think a race war was starting. Charles Manson's plan was to have whites blame blacks for these murders. And so he tried again, and this time he's going to go a bit up the scale, and he went to the house, and he had his followers go to the house of this movie star actress and this wealthy couple and sort of the beautiful people of Hollywood, and he had them murdered. A pregnant woman, one of whom was Sharon Tate, an actress, the wife of the producer Roman Polanski. And all these people were killed, and they wrote Helter Skelter on the walls, which was the title of the Beatles song. But the point was for the police to think that this was an attempt by dissatisfied African Americans to rise up against their oppressors, and he wanted the police to turn around and to drive into Watts and start killing blacks. It didn't work out. He got arrested. He was tried. I remember the movie. I don't remember the news stories. I saw the movie that came out about 10 years later. Very creepy. The actor who played Charles Manson, I don't think ever worked again because he did such a good job. No one would hire him. And Charles Manson, who actually didn't pull the trigger, was sentenced to death for organizing all this. And California got rid of the death penalty, and Charles Manson his sentence was changed to life in prison. And Charles Manson would come up from parole every so often, and he was asked, "Are you sorry?" And his response was, "I'm sorry, I was caught." Now, in our modern world, we like to think that evil doesn't exist. It's so much more comfortable to think that Charles Manson was sick, that there's something wrong. His mother was unkind to him, that he had some genetic problem, that he had a brain tumor. You know, it's more comfortable for us to think that he's abnormal than evil. Because Charles Manson was examined by all the psychiatrists, and they found him perfectly sane. Nasty, mean, evil. But he knew the difference between right and wrong. Charles Manson chose wrong. That was his choice. And we don't know, we have no evidence that he at the last, if this were a Baptist church at this point, I would say, and you know, folks, at the very end, he made his altar call, confessed his name, Jesus' name, and was saved. We don't know that. There's no evidence whatsoever that Charles Manson had any remorse. That's almost as creepy and as frightening as, if you will, as the murders itself. Because he wasn't crazy. He was unsuccessful. That's what he was mad at in his life, that he didn't pull it off. His plan didn't work. So I ask the question again, can God save Charles Manson? Can God save Adolf Hitler? Can God save people who choose evil? The answer is yes. But if we look at our parable today, we get an idea of what Jesus' teaching is on evil and how we as Christians are to live. Now, when you preach on a parable, you have to make sure you don't stretch it too far. In other words, the parable is just a story Jesus had to illustrate, to drive home a point. And if you're a clever preacher, you can take sort of an extraneous point like me and go off down a rabbit hole. But that's not really what the parable is for. The parable is, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like all the animals are gathered into the fold, and the king divides the sheep from the goats. And the sheep are put in one pen, and the goats in another, and then it moves on. And the sheep are those who are going to go to heaven, and the goats are going to go to hell. And the sheep were people who, when I was sick, you comforted me. When I was poor, you helped me. When I was lost, you found me. And the sheep, they're sort of happy they're going to be saved. But when did we do this? I don't remember. And Jesus' response, if you did it to the least of them, you've done it to me. If you shared love and compassion and held out your hand to your neighbor, not your Episcopal neighbor, not the neighbor of the same color, race, tribe, whatever you want, but your neighbor, then you held it out to me. And then the goats who say, but wait! Why are we going to hell? Because you didn't feed me, you didn't clothe me, you didn't love me, you weren't there for me when I needed you. When were you there, Jesus? In the stranger, in the lost, in the suffering. And because of that, you are going to join Satan and the demons and burn in hell forever. Now, I like hell sermons. That's one of the fun things I do. But I'm not going to do a hell sermon today. Different time for that. I want to talk about who goes to hell. And what Jesus is telling us is right thinking, if you will, religious political correctness doesn't put you in heaven. You can have all the pious thoughts, your language and vocabulary, you can be squeaky clean. But you're not going to go to heaven for your good thoughts. You're going to go to heaven because you held your hand out to your neighbor. What counts? What you do. Not what you talk about. What you do in this world. God does not set up. I'm not a Presbyterian or a Calvinist and say, too late, saved, damned, definitely damned. There's nothing you can do about it. I'm not into predestination and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure it's intellectually rigorous and all that, but it just doesn't touch me in my heart. I guess I'm more of a Episcopalian, which is, you have a choice to accept the love and grace and power of Jesus Christ or to push it away. Who goes to hell? Those who knew the love and power of God. They're part of the sheepfold. They know the shepherd. They're, all this and that, all that analogy. But chose not to turn around and take that love shown in them to the world. This follows the 5 talents passage. This follows this whole discourse of Matthew of the last few weeks that we've been going through, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is saying the way to salvation is getting out into the world and sharing the love of God. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? Do we have to sell up everything and move to Africa? Where on January 7th, when we have the confirmation, Ann Pat's, Betty's daughter, is going to be here. She's the missionary we support in Hamburg, Germany. And the bishop is going to lay hands on her and do all sorts of funny stuff. And that's the time of year that we raise money for Ann, so commercial time coming up to support her ministry. But do we all have to be Ann? Sell up all that we have and live in rather, well, I've seen the pictures, dismal circumstances, serving the poor and the lost? Well, we all have to do that? No. We're called in our lives to reach out, to love. At this point, I'm going to repeat what I said last week, and the week before, and the week before. Being a Christian is about being a Christian, doing the Christian. Not just looking at yourself and saying, aren't I wonderful, but I'm saved. It's living a life that is glorious. Not in picking the nice. See, it's not. Being an Episcopal priest, this will shock some of you, is an easy job if you want it to be. Because all you have to do is be nice to people who show up in a church and are nice anyway. So in essence, you're being nice to the people who want to be nice. And so, it's a nice little closed circle. You work maybe Sunday mornings, and if you count having to golf with the senior warden twice a week work, you may work 2 other days. Then think about your sermon. You can get away with that. But that's exactly what Jesus says sends you to hell. Because if you don't take the time and the effort to reach out and love your neighbor, not people just like you, not the people who are committed, it'd be wonderful if my congregation were Alan and Ruth. That would be lovely because they're nice people. I like them. They don't do anything that we'll talk later. But, okay, we'll stop there. We'll move to that. Okay, Sharon. Let's talk about Sharon. But, if we make our Christianity that sort of Christianity, we're going to go to hell. We're missing the point. This also ties into what Ezekiel was saying, in that the shepherd gathers the sheep, and there's some skinny sheep, and there's some fat, big sheep. And I was, fat, big sheep. And why are they fat and big? Because they're butting the little sheep. They experience the protection, the power, and the love of the shepherd, but what they're doing is they're gobbling up all of the pie and not letting anybody else have it. Is that how you live your Christian life? Do you butt out other people that sort of make this place a little uncomfortable, a little difficult, oh, they smelly, we just don't want them around? Or are you taking your faith out of this building and sharing it with the world around you and being loving and kind to your neighbor? This whole series in Matthew's Gospel teaches and hits the same point again and again and again. That your faith is not your possession that you polish up and look at a mirror and think, boy, I'm saved, aren't I a wonderful person? You turn that mirror around. I don't know if this is possible optically, but you reflect the power of God that is coming into you back into the world. And in that way, you will be saved. As I said, it's more fun to talk about hell and why you're going to go to hell. I could just go down each row and do that. But the real message here is love. This is what God's all about. This is why we gather as a church, to worship the Lord, to uphold each other in our life struggles and walk. We're a family. Last night we gathered around Lee Cable, who many of you know. Her son died of a heart attack 2 weeks ago. 47 years old, just dropped dead. And Lee is still in the, what happened? And we gathered around her. She stood in the middle of the aisle here. We all laid hands on her and prayed for her, not because that's what we do at that point in the service, but because we are a family of believers and seek to uphold and strengthen each other. And we take that ethos out into the world, which means loving people like Charles Manson. People tried until the very end, I'm told, to convert Charles Manson. He wouldn't have it. He had chosen evil. He liked evil. It made him feel good and popular. I'm sure they're also, logically, rationally, he was never going to get out. I mean, he was still a thing. I mean, every time he got on TV or gets on the tabloids, people would buy newspapers. If you were Charles Manson, if you became a Christian, meek and mild, who would care anymore? It makes perfect logical sense to remain a monster. Charles Manson shows hell. God does not say, no matter what you do, I'm sorry, you're going to hell. Well, how God operates and how hell, now this is a little bit deeper than I wanted to get into, but what the Bible teaches, what the Episcopal Church teaches, is that heaven and hell are not separate geographic places. Hell is not between Okeechobee and Miami on that highway. They are, the person in heaven and the person in hell are basically the same place, but they're in different states. Because when you are in hell, the power, the light, the fire of God burns you. It destroys you. You can't, because you have chosen evil, being in the place of extreme good and joy and power is a torment. While if you have chosen life, that same light that is shining upon you is a source of an inestimable joy and love. It's your choice. God is not forcing you into one or the other. God sent his only Son, Jesus Christ, to make this choice easy for us. He sent his Son to take upon himself our sins, our debt, so that our brokenness wouldn't burn us up when we stood before that eternal power and fire. This is a funny thing. The flames of hell and the flames of paradise are burning out of the same lamp. It's how we receive them. Now, now that I'm hell, I'll change my mind. No, I'm sorry, it's too late. So choose wisely. No second choices. Live a life glorious to God. Choose heaven. Don't choose hell. Amen. Friends, would you